Today we have, first of all, we'd like to thank our partners at at MIT Club of Washington, D.C. for partnering with us. Today we're going to have a presentation on cancer treatment, a conversation with Dr. Azra Raza, and the interview, our host would be John Donvan. Let me do a quick introduction of our panelists, our keynote. And I would like to recommend everyone to look at our website for a more detailed review of their great work. Azra Raza is a Chanson Xiang Professor of Medicine and Director of the MDS Center at Columbia University. Practicing oncologist, seeing 30-40 cancer patients weekly. She also directs a basic cancer research lab with hundreds of original publications in high-profile journals. She worked with President Clinton designing breakthrough development in science and technology, and with VP Joe Biden for the Cancer Moonshot Initiative. Her latest book, which is the topic of the discussion today, for The First Cell and the Human Cost of Pursuing Cancer to the Last, was published in October 2019. Her professional life is devoted to early detection and prevention of cancer. Welcome, Dr. Raza. And for our hosts, we have John Donvan, as a four-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, broadcaster, and debate moderator, whose best-selling book, Indifferent Key, The Story of Autism, was a Pulitzer Prize finalist. He serves as the host of the Intelligence Squared U.S., a debate series dedicated to raising the level of public discourse in America. He graduated magna cum laude from Dartmouth College and Columbia School of Journalism. He and his wife, Dr. Ronit and Shuri, have one son, Ben, and a daughter, Noah. Without further ado, thank you for coming.
I think it's us. Are we on? I shouldn't have to ask, but
you are. Everything's good. Okay.
And I'm seeing a photograph of myself rather than, oh, now I see myself. Azra, can you see me? We're seeing each other. We're communicating.
Perfectly.
Okay, terrific. So hello, hi. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Where in the world are you?
New York City, Manhattan.
Are you near Columbia University by any chance?
I work at Columbia University, but I live on the Upper East Side.
Okay, well, I'm from the Bronx, but I live in Washington, D.C., which is where I am now. I'm in the Georgetown neighborhood. So it's a pleasure to meet you. And as somebody who a few years back was out talking about a book that I'd written that I took a great deal of pride in and put a lot of effort into, I want to get right to the very beginning of the conversation, to your book, and then I want to move away, and then I want to come back to it again. And where I want to start, before I know anything else, or the audience knows anything else about you, is what's the idea behind the title of the book that you've written? The book's title is The First Cell. And what does that imply in the larger picture of what we're going to be talking about?
Thank you very much, John. Thank you to Columbia Club and MIT for giving us this opportunity. I'm really honored that you are in conversation with me, John. And in this moment of pandemic, when so much is going wrong, to have an opportunity to communicate is really something that has come as a wonderful surprise, because I thought everything will be canceled, but this Zoom has made it possible for us to communicate. Getting to my book, The First Cell, I think that the subtitle of the book is equally important, John, which is, and the human costs of pursuing cancer to the last, which is very self-explanatory that so far we have been treating cancer by trying to chase down every last cell. and we have paid a tremendous cost for it.
All right, so that's your thesis that I want to come back to. I think you've put it out there that you're looking for a different approach to addressing the challenge that cancer or cancers represent. So we'll get back there. What I want to do for people who don't know you, and you have such a great story of who you are, is to explore some of that story. So you have been an oncologist for more than 40 years. I think you arrived in the U.S. from Pakistan roughly 1977. So who were you before 1977? And how did you come to make this journey to the States? And then I really want to get to white cancer.
I'm an immigrant, as you said. I'm a Muslim. I'm a woman. I came to this country to cure cancer. At the ripe old age of 24, I arrived here as a fresh graduate from medical school.
Wow.
And since I was young, John, I have been very curious in general, but particularly about nature. And I'm sure that had I gone to school in this country, I would definitely have gone into pure molecular biology or one of the natural sciences. But growing up in Pakistan, we did not have that many choices. So my only entry into science was through med school. And I took admission into medical school with the intent that I was going to finish this, proceed to the West, and acquire a postgraduate education with a PhD in molecular biology. Except when I saw my first patient as a medical student. Basically, one look was all it took. And I realized that from that moment on, everything I would do in future would be directed at trying to reduce the suffering of these patients.
You mentioned that as a child you had an interest in nature. Can you talk a little bit more about what that was? Are you talking about wildlife or the universe? What was your perspective on it as a kid?
Everything. When I was 4 years old, I was chasing and following ants around very long summer afternoons in Karachi, watching them go single file. And I used to sit and imagine all sorts of wonderful things happening once they went into their home. And then I started reading about them. And I can confidently say I know more about ants. I'm a real myrmecophile, a myrmecologist. I know more about ants than I do.
Wait, that's not a word I know. That's the study of ants?
Study of ants and lover of ants, myrmecophile.
I had no idea. So,
and from that, I started reading about evolutionary biology. I really got interested in Darwinian evolution. By the time I was 16, I had read The Origin of Species and A Descent of Man. And my interest just kept increasing in biology in general. And I kept reading more and more. Paleoanthropology became my next obsession, actually. I read so much in paleoanthropology that I read even Bones of Contention.
Did you have a peer group that was supportive of this? Your friends and your siblings, or were you an outlier in this regard? You sound like you were a really, really serious and almost bookish young girl.
I wouldn't say I was totally bookish. We had a lot of fun. I come from a very big family, but honestly, John, there wasn't that much to do besides play and go to school and long summers. Our school went until morning till 1 o'clock, and then you had the whole afternoon free. In the evening, we would all go out and play. But the whole 3-4 hours of the afternoon you had to yourself. And every afternoon as a family, we would spend reading. So I don't think I was an outlier, that there was no television. There weren't the kinds of distractions that we have today.
No video. Ants were your video game, except that, as you say, you spent much of your time imagining what they were doing underground, which I really find like a fascinating concept. And I know that you have siblings who are also in the medical field. Am I right about that?
Yes, in fact, the definition of a bum in my family at one time was anyone over 18 not going to medical school.
So back in the 70s, the world was not nearly as connected at that time. Overseas phone calls were still a project to be undertaken. So putting Pakistan behind you and coming to the States, you went to the West Coast of the United States, I think. Was that, how major a leap was that for you at the time?
Not such a big leap as you might be thinking about, simply because, John, by the time, growing up in colonized countries like India, Pakistan, by the time we are 5 years old, we are fluent in broken English.
Mm.
And in fact, the medium of education was English. In fact, all my syllabus, right from the beginning, had the great Western authors of literary tradition. Everything I studied was in English, the medium was. And part of reading all the fiction, the great authors from Hardy and Dickens and Austen, it was all very much a mixed culture, so to speak. So I was, in fact, more out of place in that culture than I would be here. And besides, the second thing is that at least by then, 4 of my siblings were already here in this country. So, I mean, I came into a family. I didn't live on my own. I came to the East Coast. I have never lived on the West Coast. In fact, 10 years in Buffalo, New York. So every place else feels like a tropical zone to me, including Chicago, after having spent 10 years in Buffalo.
Yeah. I'll do one more question about that time period, and then we'll move forward. But I happen to know, because I'm a contemporary of yours, that was still a time when major medical schools, for example, had quotas on the number of women that they would take. So you were a rarity in a number of ways, being an immigrant and being a woman. Can you talk a little bit about that? Was there any challenge to that? Or, because honestly, you're making it sound like it wasn't that big a stretch or that difficult a climb for you to make that leap over to the United States and get into a residency program here.
No, getting into a residency was very difficult, in fact, because I was a foreign medical graduate. But once I got into a residency, I have to say that I did not face racism at all. Sexism, of course, we face all the time. To this day, we face it. And in those days, a lot more was acceptable than it is, thankfully, today. I can't say that it's an easy route. Nothing is easy, and especially in a competitive field like medicine. And as you pointed out, rightly so, that there weren't that many women. But I wouldn't think it was any more difficult than it would be today. I mean, the world is so competitive today.
Yeah.
Also. Yeah. So I don't think I particularly had any more difficult a time than young people do now.
All right. So you were a young immigrant. You were a freshly minted medical student. You make this journey to the United States. You had grown up really, really deeply educated and loving nature and having dreamed about ants. And then you discover cancer. And that's the moment that I really want to get to, in your book, and what it was about this set of diseases that grabbed you. Kind of, where was the moment where that happened?
It happened to me when I was in 3rd year of medical school and started seeing patients in Karachi, Pakistan. And one of the things that really struck me dramatically was, because we were like a tertiary care center, the hospital that I was working at in Karachi, which the largest city in the country, people would travel from long distances from villages and far away to come and seek therapy. And the cancer patients that came, John, had such advanced diseases that I have seen that you never see in the West, because they seek treatment earlier. And the suffering that goes with that, first of all, and second, the intellectual challenge of what is happening when something goes wrong with a single cell and it goes rogue. It develops a life of its own, it immortalizes itself, and almost is a new species that is evolving right in front of our eyes. So cancer intellectually was something that for me brought evolutionary biology, embryology, oncology, of course, molecular biology, everything as a challenge in one specific question.
So it was both the depth of the puzzle that it represented on the one hand, which appealed to you intellectually, but also the suffering that you saw. So there was a part of your head was engaged with this, part of your heart, it sounds like, was engaged by this as well.
Unless we are emotionally gripped by something to such an extent that it's the kind of thing when my daughter once asked me, should she consider going into medicine or not? And my response to her was that, look, it's the same as trying to decide about getting married. Never marry someone you can live with. Only marry someone you can't live without. You see, because both marriage and a career like medicine are such serious choices where an irrational, emotional thing has to grab you. And if it doesn't, then every difficulty kind of enlarges into some mountain out of molehills. On the other hand, if your emotions are involved, you can have the worst fight in a relationship and 5 minutes later you've forgotten it. You could have written, you could have worked for 2 months writing a grant, and suddenly all the suffering is good because you are able to see a patient smiling. And that's why you're absolutely right. It was the dual challenge of the intellect as well as emotions that combined. And then I had really no choice going forward after third year of medical school. I knew that this is what I was going to devote my life.
So let's get to your book then. And the book, for those who don't know, is both an act of kind of medical history, personal journey, personal story, and argument. And the argument that you make is what's embodied in your title, The First Cell, and what you told us at the beginning, that you have a concern that the field of medicine, especially the narrowing field of oncology, is focused really on the end stages of the treatment, and that's you almost use the word sort of Neolithic, the approach that is taken to cancer. So before I get ahead of you, talk about again what that argument is. And I also want to ask you this: there are times when you sound angry in the book, that you're angry about something, and I want to know what it is that you're angry about, and if that's the correct word or not.
I would say the correct word is frustration. More than anger, it's my expression of frustration. I mean, and to answer your first question also, the idea for me, it is impossible to reconcile the fact that here we are living, John, in the era of the most sophisticated technology. And yet we are using Paleolithic treatments for cancer, slash, poison, and burn. We started slashing breasts 500 years BC, when the Queen Atosa's breast was sliced off by her Greek slave. We are still slashing women's breasts. Chemotherapy, the drugs, chemotherapeutic drugs that we use were developed as chemical warfare in the First World War. And when we had these vats of chemicals sitting around, people had been imagining how to poison cancer cells, started giving it. Imagine, still we are. So
that's literally true, that bioweapons were the source of the original chemotherapy drugs?
Literally true. The first 3 drugs that were developed, in fact, chlorambucil and cytoxin and melphalan, they're all 3 are still being used. I treated my husband with 2 of them. To this day, these chemical warfare things that were developed. So what you are listening or hearing in my voice now is not anger, it's frustration. The slash poison burn has not changed. So yes, we are curing 68% cancers today. But with what? Why are we hurting people so much? And I want to step back a minute and tell you that I'm not a writer. I'm not an author. I've spent all my time. I still see 30 to 40 cancer patients every week. I do the bone marrows with my own hands to this day. And I have a cancer research lab that I'm in charge of, and we are using cutting edge technology, and we are constantly publishing in high profile journals. So I'm a serious scientist and an oncologist. I'm not a writer, but something that forced me to write finally, and that resulted in the first cell, was really the experience with my daughter's best friend. My daughter Shahrzad, whose best friend Andrew, it's not her boyfriend, Andrew was gay. They were together since 8th grade. And at 22 years of age, one day, John, this young, beautiful young man develops weakness and pain in his arm. He goes to the emergency room, and within hours, he's quadriplegic. And they discover a 9-centimeter large brain tumor in this 22-year-old, who has been in and out of my home since he was 15 years old. Now I'm faced with this question. When the boy opens his eyes out of the anesthesia, the first thing he says to his mother when he's told the diagnosis is, "Mom, don't worry, just call Azra. She's on the cutting edge, she'll cure me." And so here, for me, this was the double whammy. That on the one hand, every oncologist from that moment of diagnosis knew that no matter what we do, we are not going to improve his survival by a single day. And on the other hand, it's not just that the tumor was going to kill him. Now we were going to make it so much worse for this boy. We were going to give him chemotherapy, more surgery, more radiation, immune therapy, more chemo, more targeted therapies, so that by the time he dies, and so that's the question I asked myself at that moment. It slapped me physically. The intense aggression of his cancer compared with the complete helplessness of all his treating oncologists, that the only choice we are giving this 22-year-old young man is either you die of cancer or you die of the treatment we give you. And why are these the only choices we are giving? Because he is diagnosed with very advanced disease. 32% of individuals who are diagnosed with cancer today are diagnosed with advanced disease, which we can't cure, and which they succumb to in very painful circumstances.
Meaning that they're diagnosed very, very late in the development of their cancer.
The point is that even that slash poison burn, which is curing people early, doesn't cure them, doesn't help them at all when they're diagnosed with advanced disease. So for the last 50, 60 years, we have spent $250 billion in research. We are trying to develop drugs that will kill every last cancer cell. And the result is that 95% of experimental drugs that we bring to the bedside, 95% are failing today. And the 5% that succeed should have failed because they are improving survival by months, 2 months, 3 months for a fraction of patients.
When you say 95%, if I might just get for clarification, when you say the 95% of the drugs fail, are you talking about 95% of all drugs, including experimental protocols, or 95% of all FDA-approved drugs that are part of the established protocol now?
No, I'm talking about 95% of new drugs we try to develop. So we keep using the same chemotherapies. Any new targeted drugs or new kinds of therapies we are bringing, 95% of them fail. And except for a couple of instances like chronic myeloid leukemia or acute promyelocytic leukemia, where there was one gene that was causing the problem, so switching the gene off with one magic bullet worked, it kind of established a paradigm that all we have to do is find one gene for the other cancers. a gene for ovarian cancer, a gene for pancreatic cancer, and then find the magic bullet to target it with that, and we'll be home safely. Well, that hasn't panned out. In fact, that has been misleading in a way, because every other cancer turns out to have hundreds, if not thousands, of mutations and problems going on. So what you are hearing in my voice, what you read in my book, is basically the idea that we have to bring the patient back front and center. The success in oncology should not be measured by the fact that 68% patients are being cured. What are we curing them with? With giving indiscriminate therapy that is like beating a dog with a baseball bat to get rid of its fleas. That's how terrible this treatment is, and those are the successes.
So what do you envision, or what do you yearn for as an alternate world, an alternate approach when it comes to cancer?
I think in the alternate approach that I write about and I talk about basically is that it's not cancer that is incurable. It's the delay in treatment that makes it so. Mm-hmm. So if you think about Andrew, if we had diagnosed his brain tumor when it was small, even surgery, even this Paleolithic slashing approach could have worked for him, right? So the same treatments that are failing can work earlier on, just as it's proved by the fact that 68% cancers are cured today with those horrible treatments. But 32% are not because they're advanced. So why not just try to diagnose earlier cancers? So going forward, the idea is, okay, we have cancer patients today. So we have to keep trying to help them in every way possible and keep trying to bring whatever we can to the bedside. But at least for the future, we can envision something better. What I'm envisioning is, why depend on any one test like a mammogram or a PSA detecting the prostate-specific antigen, or a pap smear or a colonoscopy done once a year to see if there is cancer? We miss so many. Why not use the latest sophisticated technology, not any one, not two, not three, but as many as needed, 20, 30, 40 technologies together to constantly monitor the human body as a machine, the healthy human body. And I can show you one example here. This is something that's FDA approved. It is a chip called the M-chip, which was developed by biomedical engineers at Columbia University. You just have to put a drop of blood here, and through these microfluidic channels, it will go and then react with an antigen that we have put there, an antibody that we have put there, so that if there is an antigen on the surface of some of these cells, they'll interact. And you can read this by putting it into a tiny device. This is an FDA-approved chip, and you can measure PSA sitting at home every day if you want. So the idea is, if we develop the proper biomarkers for each cancer, then we can put them each in a row. So that pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancer, lung cancer, and sitting at home once a month, you could do this. Put a drop of blood here, put this into your device and see if there is the appearance of even the faintest footprint. So the point is, for the future, we need to identify by studying human cancers directly, not in animals, not in tissue culture cell lines, but directly studying human cancers to identify what proteomics, genomics, metabolomics, transcriptomics, biomarkers we can identify, what footprints, what are they shedding, what is their DNA like, what is their RNA like, what is wrong with that. A combination of these technologies combined with scanning and imaging devices and using artificial intelligence to make sense of putting all this together, and then monitoring the body continuously, not once a year. And I am confident that the coming decade, 2020 to 2030, will see this shift happen dramatically, a 180-degree turnaround from treating disease to preventing disease. Cancer is a silent killer. Andrew had this tumor grow to 9 centimeters in his brain before it's discovered. Why? Because it doesn't let out any symptoms.
So Azra, it sounds like your frustration is that you live in a time before this technology has been developed. Not that nobody's working on this, and not that it can't be done. And I ask that because part of preparing for this, I just went into Google and entered the word biomarkers with a whole bunch of different biomarkers, leukemia biomarkers, prostate cancer, and found hundreds of studies for each category, which told me, well, people are working on this. People are looking for these biomarkers. So do I have that right, that your frustration is impatience as a clinician, that you don't have access to it now? But not that your frustration is that there's some kind of barrier other than time and knowledge or resistance to having to this approach. That is to say, there's nobody out there who's committed to the old technology. There's nobody out there committed to chemotherapy and preserving that. Or am I wrong? Is there an institutional roadblock involved?
Yes, you're wrong. You're wrong.
Tell me about that.
The reason I say you're wrong, John, is that 95% of the budget is still going towards developing treatments for end-stage disease. Only 5% towards early detection and markers. And most of that by private companies who see the future, thankfully, and are trying to invest in it and are more taking risks, so to say. Well, anyway, what risk? Because if they keep trying to develop therapies for the last cancer cell, they are investing in an enterprise which has a 95% failure rate. What could be worse than that? And
what explains then that any commitment to that end of the spectrum of research versus what sounds like, between your eyes, obvious argument that prevention serves all the interests of medicine. Cost, health, pain, suffering, even your scientific curiosity that we were talking about in the beginning to see this work done. What explains the failure for this transition to happen?
It didn't happen overnight, and it's not deliberate. I have to clarify this because we all started by trying to understand the biology of cancer and trying to reverse whatever has gone wrong 50, 60 years ago. And we kept trying to, discoveries have been made, and the biologic understanding that has been developed for cancer is spectacular. But it hasn't translated into improved therapies for patients. Peter DeRise writes in his book, in 1961, he says this: so leukemia today is more of a local train rather than an express train. Same run, a few more stops. But then that is the art of medicine, prolonging disease.
Yeah.
That was written in 1961. It's still exactly true today, because in 1977, I was treating cancer with two drugs called, popularly known as 7 and 3. 7 days of one, 3 days of another. That was 1977. In 2020, that is still the same treatment we are giving. It is unconscionable.
Seriously, it's that unchanged. Wow.
So point I'm making is that every few years, there is a dramatic discovery like oncogenes. So the whole field starts looking for oncogenes. Then it was, we should choke off the blood supply of tumors. So for 10 years was spent in trying to develop drugs to choke off blood supply. It turned out all these things work well in mice, but when you bring them to humans, they just don't show any fantastic responses. And now is the day of immune therapies and cell therapies. How many times, if you Google CAR T cell therapy, immune therapy, how much drama you are going to see? What everybody fails to mention is that with CAR T therapy, which is directing the immune cell to go and kill the cancer in your body, those CAR T cells cannot distinguish between a normal cell and a cancer cell. Did you know that? No, they don't say this. Nobody discusses this at all. And it's all the time patting yourself on the back, giving yourselves gold medals and saying wonderful things, congratulating yourself that, wow, we have engineered the body's own T cells to go and specifically kill the cancer. No, it's killing the whole organ in which the cancer existed. So the whole lymphoid B cell system is destroyed for the rest of the body. You have to, rest of the patient's life. Then if they survive this brutal treatment, is you have to keep replacing the function of B cells, because you killed every last B cell using these CAR T cells. So the idea is all these things are happening in front of our eyes. And because of the frustration of public, because of the pressure put upon the FDA from advocacy groups and patient groups, etc., and of course the greed and our own frailties of human nature that force us to try and get a piece of the pie. And especially when your paycheck depends upon writing a grant which will get funded, then all these things together.
Right, but it seems to me the great pie to have a piece of, that people would be researchers and business would be companies, pharmaceutical companies would love to be able to announce to the world, is that they've invented that chip that you're talking about, that can spot and prevent cancer at the first cell stage before it's begun its process. And that's the part that I'm not getting, is why it seems like such an attractive, appealing goal. What explains is it a little bit like trying to get to Saturn? It's just it's a difficult thing to do, or is it more like the moon mission where we debate whether we should even try and expend the money?
No, it's first of all, technology wasn't there. Remember that it took 15 years and over $2 billion to sequence the first human genome, right?
Yeah.
It took 15 years. Today we can do it in 2 weeks for a couple of $100. So
Amazing.
there are some good things about capitalism. So we have to admit the technology just wasn't there. Now technology has become available and people are turning towards it, but still so much is being wasted at the other end, and patients are suffering. 42% become completely financially ruined by second year of their diagnosis of cancer. 50% of women who have stage 4 breast cancer are being hounded by collection agencies. So all this is happening. Why? Because we have all been led into just trying to kill that last cancer cell constantly. I mean, nobody is trying to hurt patients. It's not that deliberate, but it's also the ability for somebody to just call out and say the emperor has no clothes. Stop using these treatments, and we need to financially incentivize the search for the first cell, the way we have financially incentivized the reaching for the last cell. And once that financial incentive appears, John, mark my words, the entire world will turn around. And I think that this
So you're saying
it's
about money. It's about money ultimately, is what this piece of it is about, financial incentives.
I have to tell you that in my 43 years in this country, as a physician, I have yet to meet an oncologist who did not care for their patients. So everyone is trying to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is we painted ourselves into a corner with developing this system, which then becomes self-perpetuating. I mean, that's happened to all the systems, that they have sort of a medieval infrastructure. The things for grant funding that were put into place 60 years ago, the same rules, the same kinds of review processes apply today. And unfortunately, the same old people are sitting on top, scratching each other's backs. And they can't change because that's all they know how to do.
Well, I want to bring in questions from folks who are listening to you speak. So I'd like to move to that phase of our program. But before that, I have one very short question for you. When your daughter said that she wanted to go into medicine, and you said it's like getting married, don't choose someone you can live with, but someone you can't live without. Did she go into medicine?
It's interesting. She had decided to go to medicine as undergrad at Columbia University. She did take pre-med, but she also took Middle Eastern Studies major because she said that the two people she saw were loved each other the most were her parents. One was a Muslim and the other is a Jewish guy from Brooklyn. And so she has to know something about the Middle East now. So she did this double major and she got into this whole thing of storytelling because of this combination. So when she came out of Columbia University after graduation, she had a mind to go to med school, but said, let me take a couple of years off and do some science journalism. So in fact, she worked with Ken Burns and made this documentary on the gene, PBS two-part series for Siddharth Mukherjee, my colleague. So my daughter worked in that and got so involved in this whole idea of storytelling now, but especially scientific and medical storytelling. That I think she's going more your field as journalism and investigative journalism and scientific storytelling journalism kind of thing.
Well, I can't say it's necessarily a secure living, but it can be very satisfying. Let's go to some questions then, and here we go.
Sure. Thanks, everyone, and I appreciate the very stimulating conversation. Just to set up the ground rules for our Q&A, there is, as everyone have noticed, there is a raise hand button at the bottom. So if you click on it, we will see those raised hands in sequence. And what we're going to do is our admin will open up, unmute every individual, and the person can speak the question. We mute the person back, and we will hear the response. And we're going to go first through all the raised hands. And once it's finished, if you have an audio problem, you can also type your question. There is another box you've seen. You can text your question, and our admin, Nyako Rierek, would speak out, and we can answer until we run out of questions. So let me just quickly stop sharing this. And just bear with us.
Okay.
John, I look more literate than you. I have more books.
You do. I thought maybe those were all video cassettes, but no.
Okay, we have our first question from Mina Mirfat, and I'm going to unmute you now, Mina.
Hi, Mina. Mina, I'm not sure if you're speaking, but I can't hear you. I'm not sure. Azra, can you hear?
No, now we can, I think.
Okay.
Oh, it keeps, okay, now it's unmuted. Hi, this is Mina. I'm delighted that you are here. I'm very, very sorry that we are unable to meet you in person. Our plan, I'm the MIT, I'm the incoming president of MIT Club of DC, and we had arranged for you to be at the wonderful offices of Foley, and it's very sad that we are not meeting in person, so hopefully one day I will meet you. I think it's very important, some of the issues that you're talking about, especially now when healthcare and the issue of health is so important in the post-COVID era. One of the things that I heard, which is really disturbing, is that many people with diseases such as cancer have died as a result of not being treated because of COVID. And I don't know how true that is, but this was just a few days ago, hearing that many people who would have normally been going to doctors and having, you know, regular checkups or testing of things that would allow them to know where they are in the stages of cancer have missed it, and therefore have died sooner than they would have. Is that true?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you also, Meena, for giving me this opportunity to appear. I wish it was in person. I was also very excited to meet everybody. Cumbies has been simply absolutely marvelous throughout this whole process of putting this program together. So I want to take an opportunity to thank both you and Cumbies, and to rope in someone as outstanding as John to be my interlocutor. What could be better? And the only thing that could be better was if we were all in person together. So really the loss is, I feel like it's all mine, and I hope to make up for it one day, and we should all meet in person. To answer your question, I can only say, personally speaking, that has not been the case for me. We have been very vigilant with our cancer patients at Columbia University. In fact, we doubled our vigilance, honestly, because of our concern for the COVID crisis. And our leadership at Columbia University and New York Presbyterian, which is the epicenter of the epicenter. Even in New York City, our zip code, where New York Presbyterian is located on 168th Street, right next to the Bronx, Meena, that is the epicenter of this pandemic. And yet the way the leadership has conducted the business there, taking care of not just the COVID patients, but making sure that oncology patients are cared for even more thoroughly and carefully. I'm very grateful for it. And personally, that is not my experience, but I can't talk to what the numbers look like.
Thanks, Meena, very much.
Okay, great. Our second question is from Annabella Maria Galang. I'm going to open your line.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Awesome. Well, first of all, it's such a pleasure to get to talk to you. My name is Annabella. I'm a freshman studying genetics at Cornell University. I'm just in my undergrad years, and I wanted to let you know that your book was a big part of a class that I just took this past semester. It was a partnership between a local cancer resource center and cancer researchers at the school, and it was almost a book club. So we all read your book and we were talking about it. And one of the questions that I had as I was reading this book is, I'm really, really early, clearly, in my career in the pursuit of science and medicine. And I suppose one of the things that really resonated with me was the idea that you were talking about. So much of cancer research is based off of animal models and these cells in dishes and stuff like that, and how it's not super accurate once you compare that to the patient you have sitting in front of you. And I suppose what my question is that, for what advice you have for early career scientists like myself, like how can we make this right for the future?
That's such a good question, because I mean, obviously, I don't want to start dropping these pearls of wisdom, which are really just inanities in the end. My advice to you would be, I don't know, have you seen the program or the series called The Crown? If you haven't, watch it. Because in The Crown, I found something very interesting that affected me, and I'll tell you what it is. As we go through medical school and then start seeing patients and we come into practice, all our mentors tell us the following, that do not get too close to the patients, because if you become too involved, then your emotions will be invested, and that means that will cloud your judgment. Now, seeing The Crown, I also found that the current Queen Elizabeth was not even a teenager when her father became the king, and so she was the successor. So she was raised to be royalty, and she was taught continuously that she must behave very differently. She must maintain a distance, a formality with everybody else, because she's the monarch, the future monarch. And that's how she conducted herself. Except when she becomes queen, this is how she behaves. Suddenly there's an avalanche that kills a number of young children. And she knows that if she goes there, she won't be able to control her emotions. So she chooses not to go. And the entire country comes out dissing her, calling her cold and hard-hearted and stony and what kind of a person. And it reminded me very much of the dilemma that we live through as doctors, that we are told to remain distanced and dispassionate from our patients. And yet they ask us for sympathy, for empathy. They want to share their pain with us, and they can't do it with a cold and dispassionate and distanced doctor. The reason I'm telling you all this is it's easy to have these cliches of give up, don't use tissue culture cell lines and don't use animal models, but use human. Of course, we know all of that. But the most important thing, a piece of advice I would have for a young person like you is don't be afraid of getting invested and having your emotions involved, because in fact, it's the opposite. Unless you get your emotions involved, like we talked earlier, you won't be able to bring all your faculties to bear. Your physical, intellectual, and emotional, everything has to come down. And think of what happened to me. My mentor was Harvey, who we got married later on. As a mentor, he told me the same things. Don't get involved too deeply with your patients. I'm not sure I really followed his advice. But about 15 years later, when Harvey gets diagnosed with leukemia, he turned to me and he said, "Az, you are going to take care of me. You're going to be my oncologist." I was shocked and I said, "What are you saying? You are the one who told me all my life not to be close to the person I'm going to treat." And his response was, "Sorry, I only trust your judgment. So you'll have to just do it." And I did it. And I was able to somehow stand on both sides of the bed. Did it change me as an oncologist, Annabella? No, I don't think so, but it changed my perceptions of life and of everything around me completely and forever. So if you ask me for advice as a very young person, this is my single piece of advice. You do not be afraid to get involved. In fact, you must get involved in every possible way and find a good mentor and give it your all. And that's it. Success must continually be won and is never finally achieved. Every day puts at risk what has been gained. And the bigger your gain, the bigger will be your risk of loss. Don't be afraid of it.
Thanks, Annabella, very much. And as we're lining up the next question, I'm curious when you talk about getting involved. You're talking about an emotional involvement, but another thing that doctors are often saying is that their job is just about the science and the treating of the patient, and that they should not get involved in political advocacy, that that's not part of medicine. But I know other physicians who take the exact opposite position and consider physicians, clinicians to be in the front lines of all kinds of issues that have a political component, and argue that doctors should be doing politics too. They should be making speeches, writing papers, advocating, running for office. What do you think about that as another form of commitment that really amounts to involvement?
John, I grew up in Karachi, Pakistan, and one reason for me to leave and to make a decision that I was going to leave was that I knew how much obsessed I was with science and with medicine and wanting to use the latest technology and come to a country which is affluent enough to afford the kinds of research that I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. But it was a difficult decision, except I knew, because obviously culturally and in every way, my parents were there and all my friends, I grew up there. But I knew, John, that if I stayed back in Karachi, I wouldn't be able to continue the pursuit of medicine and science. I would become an activist. Because it would be impossible for me to sit back and not get involved. I come to this country for that reason. I didn't want to be an activist. I wanted to be a scientist and an oncologist. 43 years later, what am I? an activist. So you can't escape your fate. It's like sliding doors. You know that Gwyneth Paltrow movie?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. That's what it is. You can't escape who you are. I come here, I'm an activist. So when you ask me about should doctors get involved in politics, doctors have to be the best advocate for their patients. If it means getting involved in politics, then it's criminal not to. This is my answer.
Thank you. Let's go on to another question.
Ellen, you're up.
Did you say Ellen?
Ellen, yes.
Ellen, hi, how are you? Welcome.
Hi, I'm actually a J school grad, and I'm was immediate past president of our Michigan club. Oh gosh, I have so many things I could ask. I was a caregiver for a number of years for both my parents. My dad was a doctor, and my mom had some, chronic health issues, and my dad ended up having cancer at the end of his life. Since you were talking about you haven't met an oncologist who has not cared for his patients, my dad had the poor luck to be a patient of Dr. Farid Fata, who you probably know of him. He's in prison right now because he grossly overtreated patients who didn't need the treatments, and he also deemed people having cancer and treated them just for Medicare and Medicaid fraud. He was in all the national news, so you probably know who he is, but that made a lot of people very suspicious of getting these late life aggressive treatments, because he did take advantage of that. And I think one of the reasons he succeeded is because another issue, especially with cancer, is people just want to fight and fight and fight. And he was able to prey upon that sort of, paradigm that we have right now with cancer. And then, people end up probably maybe going on hospice for 24 hours before they die. And as you're talking about, these treatments are just, devastating. At the same time, I understand people wanting to fight. And there's hope. I think I've read there's a statistic that something like 95% of people will not be that, 1% that is the miracle, but they all think they are going to be that 1%. And so it's a very seductive thing to want to try all these. And hopefully you have a good oncologist. I wonder if you think, I'm interested in the slow medicine approach. I don't know if you've heard that term with many diseases. Do less harm, maybe get more palliative care going early on, maybe have a little more acceptance that we're going to die of something. And I think a lot of doctors don't want to have those conversations. And as my dad he was a pathologist, he said, medicine is more art than science oftentimes. So you don't always know if it's going to work, which again puts you in that position. And I'm intrigued that these targeted therapies, the immune therapies, what you said about that, I thought they were a little bit more subtle and sophisticated. But, and then it's sort of a second thing, whatever you feel like responding to, this card, I keep wondering why there aren't more blood tests. These tumor markers that they sometimes look at, they supposedly don't really tell you much. And that's why I would love it if we could have earlier testing is the key to get.
I can answer both your questions, darling. Yeah. First of all, allow me to offer my heartfelt sympathies to you, Ellen, because seeing a parent suffer and die, or seeing someone you love go through cancer, both you and I have been through it. Yeah. I'm very sorry that your father had that unpleasant experience. That's why I said I haven't met any oncologists, but of course, I'm sure there are these exceptions. Second thing I want to say to you is, Ellen, that if I get acute myeloid leukemia today, I just told John earlier on that I was treating this disease with 7 and 3 in 1977. Today we are treating it with 7 and 3 with the same dreadful results. Basically, 26% patients will have longer term survival with the most brutal treatments. So if I get acute myeloid leukemia today, what would I do? I would still take 7 and 3. Because life is too precious. What do I have to lose? I'll die. I'll die anyway from the leukemia. So But having said that, there does come a point where it is clear that, okay, I tried it, it didn't work. Now acceptance is much better. And yes, life comes in screaming and then is extinguished one day suddenly. And when we embrace this concept happily, then we can move beyond good and evil, so to say, and come to this acceptance. But it's difficult, it's not easy. Somebody like me who's walking people to their deaths on a weekly basis, just haven't found many people who are willing to do that. And your second comment about why aren't there blood tests available? Well, I think the most sophisticated technologies which are scaled up to economies of scale now are available for us to utilize, so that I am saying that we shouldn't be relying on any one test for anything. I'll give you one example, and John, this would be important for all our audience to hear.
Mhm.
So, for example, the kind of future I'm imagining in oncology now is this. I go to sleep at night and the bed sheets I'm using scan me overnight with special imaging techniques to find a hot area in my body. What's a hot area? Well, as cancer starts, it has to increase its nutritional supply, which means it has to make new blood vessels. That area becomes hot as soon as there is formation of new blood vessels. So the scanning sheets will find, let's say one night I wake up in the morning and the monitor shows that there is a small hot area in the head of my pancreas. Does this mean that the next morning I should have open abdominal surgery and evisceration of every organ? No, of course not. It means that there is now a region of interest that should be followed and monitored more carefully, perhaps supplemented by other non-invasive techniques like an ultrasound or something. But then I should look for other markers. What markers? Well, RNA, DNA, protein, metabolites. Where should I look? In blood and sweat and tears and saliva and urine and skin and my micro, everywhere. There should be very simple tests that should be available to test all the compartments. So it shouldn't be just a mammogram once a year. Rather, it's every night you are being automatically scanned. And then when areas appear, you follow them. You try to supplement it with 20 or 30 other tests of biomarkers from all kinds of compartments. And once you determine that there is something in the head of my pancreas which is growing, which is shedding markers, the question is it potentially lethal or just a benign thing? And that can be determined by methylation markers, by all kinds of specialized technology. That a lot of it exists, a lot of it is in development, a lot of it is just being imagined. And only then do we take a step, and then the treatment is much simpler, because that a little lesion in the head of pancreas can be zapped with a laser beam rather than me receiving the slash poison burn. So that's the kind of future I'm imagining. And mark my words, this coming decade is going to see this 180-degree turnaround. Why? Because we can't afford to continue this way.
So you may be frustrated, but you're also optimistic.
Very much so. In fact, my book is a very futuristic, forward-looking book.
Okay. Let's go on to another question. Thanks very much, Ellen.
Nancy, you're up next.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
This is Nancy.
Nancy. Nancy, welcome. Nancy, we're not hearing you if you're talking, and might be a muted mic. I can hear you now. Yeah.
Hello, Dr. Raza. As you well know, my husband was your patient, and your treatment was the silver lining of his disease. He made a contribution to your tissue repository, and I wondered if you could talk for a moment, since we're looking forward now, about its potential and progress.
Thank you, Nancy.
Nancy, thank you so much, and for coming on this program, and then for asking this question, because I know how painful it is for someone like you who saw your husband go through some of the worst things that we do to patients, including a bone marrow transplant, and how he suffered, and how in the last 10 days you simply even refused to leave his room, just planted yourself forever there, and saw everything that happened. And for you to come on this program and watch this whole conversation again, I can't tell you how deeply moved I feel by that, Nancy. Thank you so much. And thank you for asking about the tissue repository. So as I had mentioned earlier to John, I've been saving tissues on my patients since 1984. And today this tissue collection has over 60,000 samples from thousands of patients longitudinally studied as they moved in their disease from a pre-leukemia to a leukemia or to a worsening MDS stage, like your husband did, Nancy, that he was diagnosed as pre-leukemia, he was perfectly fine, healthy, like a horse. He was doing all kinds of exercises, he was so active, he was just an amazing person in every way, and for several years you couldn't tell there's anything wrong with him. And then one fine day he comes in and his hemoglobin has dropped, and we do a bone marrow, and he didn't even want to have it. He said, I'm feeling perfectly well. I do a marrow and he has 80% blasts or leukemia cells in his marrow. This is how this thing creeps up. And so the idea is, why after so many years he suddenly evolved to acute leukemia, which was impossible for us to treat. I have all the samples on your husband and on thousands of other patients. And it's not, for the audience, I want to say, Nancy of course knows this, it's not that I've been sitting around on this tissue repository doing nothing. Of course not. We keep taking out a few hundred samples, studying them for one disease, one signaling pathway, and publishing in a high-profile journal. I have hundreds of publications. But that's not what's going to take us into the future. What's going to take us into the future is not studying one gene or one set of RNA or proteomic signature, but rather study these thousands of patients for everything multiple times. And that costs a lot of money. No grant can fund it. And it has to be a kind of a collective effort in which the goal is to really once and for all study all these samples with all the technology that is at our disposal and find the earliest marker of the first cell and then start monitoring the healthy people. But that requires a lot of commitment of resources, and that is one of the purposes of writing this book, is to bring it up front and center. I talk about it very clearly and in great detail, and ask everybody to help.
Nancy, are you still there with us?
Yes.
We've lost. I just have one question for you, if you don't mind. Azra wrote about her husband's battle with cancer, and I don't want to ask for details in the case of your family, but I would want to ask this. Do you have any advice for people who are at the beginning of a journey like the one that you've been on? Is there anything that you think that they should know?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Have them read her book. Azra's book, which I was reading as my husband was dying, gave me the perspective I needed to understand the decisions we had made and were about to make.
Thank you.
The book
Thanks
should
very much,
be read
Nancy.
by everybody.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you. And contribute to the First Cell Center.
Thank you.
And we
Thanks,
show
Nancy.
to the end.
Thank you, Nancy. You are such an advocate, and you are just amazing, and you have really helped already tremendously. And this is what provides the helium to our spirits.
The helium to your spirit. What a gorgeous phrase.
I
Also,
like that one
Dr.
too.
Raza is a poet, so we shouldn't overlook that.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Nancy. Let's move on to another question.
The next question is from Natasha. She's the co-president for the ColumbiaDC Club and also a J School graduate.
Hi, Natasha. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. It's Natasha Lebedeva, and I'm a co-president of the club together with Kambiz, who did the introduction. And I have a more generic question for Dr. Raza. Do you consider United States at the forefront of the cancer research? What's your view on this?
Absolutely, head and shoulders above everybody else. The US has got so many resources. We're very affluent, not just monetarily, but the brain drain that it has been able to attract the best minds from across the world. So the intellectual and the financial resources that this country has puts it literally quantum leaps above everybody else. And do you know what? The rest of the world looks to us for guidance. And that is why the responsibility for America is so much more, Natasha, to actually lead the way. We are supposed to be setting the trends because everyone is looking to us for guidance. And it's like that noblesse oblige, that it brings more responsibility for the privilege to act with responsibility and generosity.
Thanks, Natasha.
Thank you so much. Thank you both.
Another question, please.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Kambi's, again, very, very interesting conversation. We have been trying to get a conversation like this about CRISPR, about the gene editing to our alumni here. I was wondering if you could tell us what you think about the technology, and if this gene editing concept can be used in the future to reduce risks or to cure cancer.
Thank you, Kambiz, and once again, thank you for your support and for having me on this program. You've been just marvelous throughout the process. To answer your question, biology, in my opinion, has had like 3 major advances that basically changed the course of human history. And the first was the insight into the structure of DNA, that it's a double helical structure, and that in 1963, Watson and Crick found that out. I think the second major step in biology happened when polymerase chain reaction was discovered, because that basically made so many things suddenly possible for us to do. And Kerry Mullins got the Nobel Prize for that. He has died, unfortunately, a few years ago. And then my friend Craig Mello got the 3rd Nobel Prize for his discovery of microRNA. And that was the 3rd great discovery. So in biology, if I look back, those were the 3 great discoveries. And to me, CRISPR is equal to one of these 3, if not more right now. It is so monumental and magnificent a discovery, because it literally is a molecular scissor that has made it possible for us to be so accurate in what we want to do. And absolutely, this is what is going to get us to the first cell, because otherwise, instead of, you thrashing our arms around and trying to just kill everything and hoping more cancer cells will die than normal cells, CRISPR is the kind of technology that is allowing us to go in and edit in a very finely tuned fashion. And absolutely, it is the wave of the future. And I'm proud to say that my lab was one of the first, in fact, if not the first lab to establish CRISPR at Columbia University. And we have been using it since the get-go.
Kambiz, I think by our agreement, you were to ask the last question. Do I have that correct?
That is correct.
That's what I
feel
thought.
Very
okay.
empowered. I feel very empowered. Thanks everyone for joining. We have this recorded, and I don't know if you have your permission to post this on our YouTube channel. Is that all right? Well, just we'll do that in a day. And we have many other events next week, but this has been a very special event for me in particular, and thank you for both for joining us.
Azra, it was really a pleasure and an honor. So thank you so much. Thanks for making the time.
Well, thank you. I'm going to just recite a short Emily Dickinson to end.
Please do.
A word is dead when it is said, some say. I say it just begins to live that day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.